Okay, good morning, everybody. Glad we're able to get together finally for this press conference with David Stearns and Craig Counsell. David's going to open with a few comments and we'll go right into questions. Just a reminder, unless you're actively asking a question, please remain on mute. If you would like to ask a question, please use the raise your hand feature and I will call on you to ask the question. And with that, we'll turn it over to David.
Thank you, Mike. Thanks for everyone for hopping on. Clearly, I think this is a good day for all of us. We get to begin camp, and it feels to us like we're nearing the end of what's now been sort of a 2-year odyssey back to normality within the industry. We've had a lot thrown at us. Some of it somewhat predictable and some of it naturally completely unpredictable. And so to be at this point where it feels like we have a lot of this behind us now, it feels like we can now move forward in a much more normal fashion, preparing for a 162 game season under much more familiar circumstances. I think that's a really good and exciting feeling for all of us here with the Brewers. And certainly for the industry as a whole. From a Brewers perspective, we're incredibly excited to get this going. We feel like we're building off of a really productive season last year that ended a little bit before we would have liked it to. And we're excited to get that group back and get going in camp and preparing for a regular season. It's going to be a fast camp. It's going to be a fun camp. I think everyone's going to be pretty excited and energized to be here. And we're looking forward to get it started. So Craig and I are happy to take any and all questions that anyone has.
And as a reminder, please use the raise the hand and then I will select you. Steve McGargy, go ahead.
For Craig, I was just wondering, a couple of years ago, you had the summer camp where you had the abbreviated preseason to prepare for the season. Are there any lessons from that you can take into this, or is this kind of a whole different deal because the rosters aren't finalized and there's so many other things you have to work with?
Well, from the number of days perspective, there's definitely some similarities, but we're going to have all these games to be able to play. We're going to have so many more players involved, fields involved, like ability to train in such a better way. So, I think by nature, because we have less days, really our focus is just to stack a bunch of good days on top of each other, and then when we get to April 7th, we'll be ready to go. There's time for this. There's plenty of time for this, but I think really it just is going to heighten everyone's focus and concentration of make each day a really good day, and if you do that, you'll get to the season in great shape.
Adam McCalvey.
Craig, can you just tell us how you viewed this whole lockout period, coming at it from the perspective of someone who's been involved in CBA negotiations, and then also the perspective of a manager? How hard was it to not be, technically allowed to have contact with your players leading into a year?
I think I was an outsider in this. I was as wrong as much as everybody else was in this, of what's going on and expectations, hopes. We watched it. We were spectators in it. So I think we're happy back playing baseball, happy doing what we love to do. That's been my perspective of it. It was very difficult. The lack of communication has been very difficult for sure. And that, from a coaching perspective, from our staff's perspective, has been without a doubt the most frustrating part of this thing, I think. But it also made a lot of the conversations yesterday, a lot of fun. And so started that process, and the coaches have started that process, and we'll get to see a lot of players today, and it's made that part fun, and catching up on a lot and missing guys and catching up. So I enjoyed that last night. I know our coaches did too, talking to players, and you're making it up a little faster. I wish we would have had the steady conversation, but it's we've been conditioned for different years every year at this point.
Todd Rosiak.
This could be for either David or Craig. As far as the pitching goes, the pitchers go, where do you think they're at in their, I guess, kind of ramp up to spring? Obviously, they're going to need to hit the ground running. And then to build off of that, I think one of the questions everybody's kind of wondering about is, do you have any kind of early feel as to whether you guys might employ a six-man rotation again this season, or is that still to be determined?
Everybody froze.
Craig, you want to take that, or you want me to take it?
I think we lost Craig. Craig's frozen for now. David, you want to take that one?
I'll go ahead and take that. So on the pitching, look, we're going to have some guys in here today, we expect, and we'll be able to get our hands on them, better understand where they are. I think from the calls that Craig and Chris Hook and Jim Henderson made last night, we think our starters are coming in a pretty good spot at this point in March. It's really tough to simulate competition. And so that's what we're going to have to watch out for, is as all of our players, and particularly pitchers, get into competition, how they react, what they feel like. We're going to be very conscientious of how we're doing. And our medical staff and our pitching coaches do a great job of communicating regularly with our pitchers to understand where they are physically, and certainly we'll do our best to emphasize that this spring. And then from a six-man rotation standpoint, look, I think every option remains on the table. We deployed the six-man rotation, I think, effectively last year. I would expect there are going to be periods this year where we use a six-man rotation, and then there are likely going to be periods where the schedule indicates that that's not the best option for us. So we're going to maintain flexibility. We think we have six pitchers who are very capable of starting games at the major league level. And so I imagine over the course of the year, they're all going to get ample opportunity.
Will Salmon.
Hey, David, maybe based on the way, I guess, part one of the offseason ended with a flurry of activity, I feel like a lot of people kind of expected moves to be made like really quickly. Has it surprised you that there hasn't been, or does that just make sense considering like the lack of conversations that were obviously allowed? And secondly, do you mind just kind of sharing your prep work toward getting to this point where you're able to start to do things, and what that kind of looked like for you?
Sure. I think if we had seen a flurry of transactions within the first 12 hours of an agreement being reached, we probably would have had some questions about those transactions, given that none of us has been allowed to talk with each other over the last 3.5 months. So that didn't surprise me. It's probably a good thing. There were plenty of conversations throughout the industry overnight. They'll continue today. They'll continue for the next few weeks. This is a lot to cram into a multiple week stretch in March. We're not going to be able to cram it all into one day or 1 week. But there are a lot of available players. The majority of them are going to be signed and in camps. There's a lot of trade discussion that hasn't occurred over the last 3 months that will occur now. And so how quickly all of that coalesces into a deal is tough to predict, but I'm certain we're going to have industry transactions, activities, guys getting into camp here within the next week. In terms of our preparation, we've had plenty of time to prepare for what these few weeks are going to look like. You do your best to anticipate what some of those conversations some of those conversations are going to proceed, what may or may not be accessible, what may or may not be available. And sometimes we're right on what that's going to look like, and sometimes we're wrong. And I think we've learned just overnight in the conversations we've had that some of our predictions in terms of perhaps what players we're looking for, what other clubs we're looking for, were accurate, and some of them weren't. And so we'll continue to have those discussions and see if there are opportunities to improve our team.
Greg Matzik.
Hey, David, to that end, do you almost have to prioritize pitching at this point, understanding that position players may not need as much of a lead up to the regular season, but pitchers who are free agents that get into camp, this week, perhaps next week, maybe need all the time they can get?
I don't know that we're necessarily looking at it like that. I think I don't know that players are necessarily looking at it. I think when players are seeking to get into camp, they're seeking the right opportunity, and sometimes that can take time to materialize. And if we're seeking to bring someone in, we're seeking to bring in the right player, and similarly, that can take some time to materialize. So I don't know that we can necessarily go into this prioritizing bringing in pitchers sooner than bringing in position players. Regardless of who we bring in, the core of our team is here, and it's a good core. And this is the group that we're going to count on predominantly to help us win games throughout the season.
Sophia?
Hey guys, I was just wondering, if these days leading up to games, is your goal to treat it as normal of a camp as possible, or does the timeline change kind of how you lead these ramp up days leading into games?
Yeah, I don't really, the next 3 days, players will start to arrive into camp. And so that'll change things. I think what changes immediately is that we have pitchers in a little bit more advanced stage, some pitchers. So that'll just change a little bit of the work. But it's going to look largely very similar to how we would ramp up into the 4 days before spring training games in a normal year. And so not much difference from that perspective.
Andrew Wagner.
David, because you had mentioned at the end of the playoffs last year that you guys had a good core in place, because of that and so few roster holes, was it kind of a little easier for you guys to navigate this with fewer unknowns than some teams?
Maybe in some sense, because there isn't a move we feel we have to make. We do like our team. With that said, there are ways we can improve our team, and we're going to explore absolutely every avenue to do that, whether that's now or into the season or at the trade deadline. So there is maybe the urgency to do something immediately isn't quite as pronounced, but to the extent there are opportunities for us to get better, we're going to explore them, and we're going to do our best to pursue the ones that make sense.
Lance Allen.
David, kind of on that line with the universal DH, do you feel like the DH is on your roster, or do you feel like you have to kind of look around and find one?
I think that there are a number of different ways we can look at the DH, and we've talked about that over the last couple of months. Those conversations will continue. The DH can be a spot to add some flexibility to your everyday lineup. It can be a spot where we get regulars off their feet a little bit more, but keep their bat in the lineup. Or a DH can be devoted more or less to a singular player who occupies that role. I think we're open to either of those constructs. As the roster lays out right now, it probably lends itself more to the former. And if we were to add another bat or someone who's worthy of taking the majority of DH at bats, then we could switch to more of the latter. But we're not set in any one way of how we approach the DH. I think we can do it with the roster that we have and allow guys to rotate through that position. And we can also bring in someone from the outside who potentially could fulfill that position more regularly.
And we'll go back to Steve McGargy.
Universal DH was one of a number of rule changes that kind of passed with this. I was just wondering for either of you, any of these rule changes that you particularly like, any that you have a particular problem with, and what kind of impact you think it might have on the way the game is played itself?
Well, from my perspective, I think whether it's the rule changes that have been implemented or the rule changes that potentially could be implemented in the coming years, I think it's important for the game to try to progress and to try to create a more appealing product to a broader segment of fans. And if that means altering some of the rules of the game, I'm all for it. I think we all understand not all of them are going to work, but as an industry, we probably need to get a little bit more adventurous in taking risks in altering certain rules, and I'm certainly happy that one of the outcomes of the CBA is we appear poised to do that.
Greg, did you want to add to that?
I got an open mind to all of them. We'll adjust. I do think the game is ready and hopefully entering an era where we're more willing to change and we're more aggressive in trying to change, and with the understanding that we're not going to get everyone right, but we're trying to make the game better. And then, I think a lot of them, we got to get a couple more days ahead to see everything finalized and understand exactly what we're dealing with. And then give them some time as to how they play out and not make kind of quick rushes to judgment.
Okay, Todd, go ahead.
Hey, David, I just wanted to ask if there are going to be any players who will be limited due to injury at the start of camp, and then also if there are any players who live outside the United States who might be a little bit delayed as far as like visa issues.
As of now, I don't anticipate any visa issues. It seems like our group has been able to obtain the visas that they need and should be here at some point over the weekend or Monday. And in terms of anyone who's limited, give us a day or two to figure that out. We literally just started talking to our players last night, haven't put our hands on them. So give us a day or two and we'll be able to give you a better response on that over the weekend.
I only see one more hand raised, and is that of Adam McCalvey, who's celebrating his 50th birthday today. Go ahead, Adam.
Thanks, Mikey. Counts, based on talks you had with players last night, what's the relationship right now between teams and players? Is everybody ready to get back together?
I mean, guys were excited. I mean, that was the number one thing. Ready to just play baseball. And I think that's what we're all, whether it be watching baseball, playing baseball, coaching baseball, getting on the field, I think is what everybody expressed is let's go get on the field together in a Brewer uniform. So that's what we're looking forward to. I think players have a great ability to understand that there's a business side of the game, whether it be their own contracts or the collective bargaining agreement, and they're really good at separating those two. And that was my sense of it yesterday.
And we'll take one more from Todd.
Hey, Craig, David was able to get that deal for Hunter Renfroe under the wire before the lockout started. I don't think we got a chance to ask you about it on the record. So just curious from your perspective, what do you think he adds to your team?
Yeah, I talked to Hunter last night. I fell asleep before David made that trade, so then I didn't get to talk to him. So I apologize for that. That was my first act with Hunter Renfroe. That was my first time talking to him yesterday. But look, I think this is he's a kind of true right fielder. That's what he's. We lost a productive player in the middle of the lineup, and I think we've replaced in very similar fashion. A very talented player who is, I think, at a stage of his career where he's getting better.